Good morning, everyone. It's Joker, and today we are back with another slime video. Another beginner's guide-esque video for newer players who are coming in during the third anniversary. So I put out the basic overview of slime and progression and how you make gear, and it's a very high level, broad overview of how to play the game. And I recognize that it doesn't touch on a lot of very specific things that people want to know more about. So I'm going to make some follow-up guides to touch on those specific things that people want to know more about. And first off, I think is one of the most important things to talk about, and that is team building, team composition. The guide I had in 2023 is very, very old. It's back when EX metas were just a brand new thing, and that was in April of 2023. It is now almost November of 2024, so it's time to update the team building guide, and I'm going to try and do it in an informative, visual way. Quote unquote. It might be a real cringe, but hey, anything that'll help you guys out, right? So this video could be long. I again will have timestamps down below and throughout the video, so you can click on something that you actually want to know about and know more about. And just this video could be long. I could go into great depth and detail and rant about random things, so bear with me. I'm trying to make this as informative as possible so you understand the mechanics and subtle difficulties of team building and what goes into making a quote-unquote good team. So before we start talking about any kind of team building, we have to talk about the main gameplay loop of this game, and that is by sending orbs. We have three primary different colors of orbs. They all do slightly different things than each other, and the entire game is built upon sending 1 through 6 different types of orbs. So first off, we have the Soul of Skills, which is more commonly referred to as green orbs because they're green in game. And this gives you the most amount of skill points and some protection gauge and some alt gauge. This makes green orbs the most versatile orb in the game. One, because we have a lot of units that buff them in large ways to give them extra everything, so they just become much better. And the fact that they don't really give small amounts of anything, but medium to large amounts, means that they're good for most things. The Soul of Divine Protection, or blue orbs, give you a lot of protection gauge, so they're really good for getting your protection character skill activated a lot of times. They give you some skill points, not a lot. There are skills that buff that up to very high levels, but they also don't give you a lot of alt gauge, so you're not going to be alting very quickly when sending blue orbs. Conversely, the Soul of Secrets, orange orbs, give you the absolute most alt gauge in the game, but also give you really bad skill points and really bad protection gauge. So they're really good for rushing your ult so you can build up and do damage very quickly, but it's going to leave you at a disadvantage when attempting to use skills or activating your protector. So as an example, let me put some gameplay up. So if we look at this screen, we have 6 blue orbs in hand. That's really good. That is good for a team that wants to run blue orbs, which we'll talk about. But we have 0 points, we have 0 protection gauge, and we have 0 alt gauge, these 2 bars underneath our green HP bar on each character. So if we click all 6 of these, we can see that we get 53 skill points. Okay, it's an okay amount. And we get a full meter and change, almost a third of our protection gauge, but we don't really get a lot of alt gauge. This little white bar underneath the green HP bar, it's not filled up very high. So blues give you a lot of protection gauge, allows you to use your protector, which is the engine of your team. Now here, we have a full hand of green orbs. We have 6 skill points right now. Okay, sure. We have a little bit of protection gauge. This is the turn immediately after sending those blues. And we have some alt gauge. But watching as we click on these 6 greens, we're getting 72 skill points. We're getting a decent amount of alt gauge for Violet because she has 5 orbs. So, I mean, we're getting almost a full alt bar right there. And we're getting a decent amount of protection gauge. We get on like 2/3 almost of a protection gauge. So while it doesn't cycle the protector right now, and it doesn't if it was like a 2-2-2 spread, we wouldn't have gotten anyone's alt, it is giving more alt gauge than just the blue orbs by themselves, and we're getting a lot more skill points from sending green orbs. And now, finally, we have orange orbs, which are going to give us a lot of alt gauge. Look at Millam. She is empty on alt gauge right now. We already have some points left over. We already have some protection gauge. But if we go ahead and send these, and I have to pause it at the right time. All right, so we're getting, I mean, you can't really tell. We're not actually going to get a lot of points here. We'll get like 40-something. We're getting not a lot of protection gauge. But Millam, I mean, if you can see it past that secret skill wording, she gets a full alt meter and then change. So if we continue and we look at her bar next turn, like she's ready to alt off three orange orbs. Yeah, look at that. She's got a full alt meter and then a little bit extra. Oranges will really get your alt quickly, but they don't give you a lot of skill points. They don't give you a lot of protection gauge, so you do have to somehow make up for that with other units. We're going to add this in afterwards, after, I had been done with everything. But I guess we should talk about rainbow orbs a bit, because they are a primary gimmick in this game that you're going to come across more often than not. Rainbow orbs are given from specific skills. There's only a few units that have the ability, and this is changes own souls to soul of unity. And you can see, based on the image, that they're orange, green, and blue. And that's because rainbow orbs act as though they are all three colors. So we just got done talking about how orange orbs give alt, and blue orbs give protection gauge, and greens give skill points, and they're all individually good and bad in their own ways. Well, rainbows, they're every orb rolled up. So sending 6 rainbows is the equivalent of sending 6 oranges, 6 blues, and 6 greens in one hand. The other benefit is that rainbows can combo off of anything. So in this example, we could send 2 Shinsha orbs, or 3 oranges, or 4 Rimuru orbs. But if we use the rainbow skill, now it doesn't matter, because we can combo off of anything, and we can send all 6, because 2 Shinchas and 4 rainbows is still 6 orbs. And we are getting a lot of skill points, a lot of protection gauge, a lot of alt gauge, because the rainbows are acting like every single type of orb. Now, rainbow orbs come in all different gimmicks of ways. They swap alts to rainbows. Rimuru converts his own. The second anniversary of Visions of Coleus, Rimuru converts all blue orbs to rainbows. The most recent Protector, Mills, converts whole hands to oranges and then to rainbows, which you probably saw in the last clip that I kind of glossed over. There are ways to get rainbow orbs, but it is fairly limited because they are very powerful. But those are what rainbow orbs are. It's just everything rolled up into one. Alright, so now that we've talked about what color orbs do what, it's time to talk about the different types of teams that run on those specific colors of orbs. First off is the Charge team, which is currently what the 3rd anniversary meta with Elmesia and Gazel and Raphael and Diablo. They are on a Charge team, a green orb-focused Charge team, which we also refer to as a stacking team, because you're stacking buffs for 6 to 8 turns so you can do really, really super huge damage. It's not meant to do things very quickly. It's meant to use high-cost skills to do high levels of damage. So 6 to 8 turn nuke, especially with the new EX Unbound characters, they get extra damage between turns 6 and 8. You're meant to do some kind of stacking effect with the Protector, whether they give you extra attack every time you use them, extra alt damage, extra pierce power. Something is going to stack from the Protector that's going to help you do more and more damage. They're also going to raise your skill cap higher and higher, so you can store a lot of skill points, so you can orb change a lot, so you can use those high cost skills, and you're going to have a literal butt ton of orb changing happening. So if we look at the current team, right here in turn 2, we've got 4 greens and 2 blues. I want 6 greens, because this is a green-focused team. We know that because Gazel converts orbs to greens if they're Divine General. That's your first indication of you're probably on a green team. So we're going to use these Raphael skills that are 0 cost and Diablo's skills. Diablo's gimmick allows you to use multiple skills every turn. So by using Gazzle twice, we have now converted into a 6 green hand, and now we have extra points so we can use more stacks of Raphael's buff, which is 10% alt damage, 10% synergy power. We're sending green orbs. We've got a lot of points back. We got protection gauge back. And you do this for 8 turns, 7 turns essentially. But here, all right, we have 2 alts. We have 2 orbs that are not greens. Well, we got a lot of points back. We've got Elmesia, so let's go ahead and reset everything with Elmesia, because that's part of her gimmick, is that she lowers your skill costs back down to keep them cheap, so you can use a butt ton of skills in one turn. So boom, that's another 10% stack on Raphael. That's another multi-use gimmick. That's another orb change. Let's do it again. Not Diablo, because we already had to use them once, but another stack, another orb change, and we still have points left over. So let's bring in Shizu so we can change those 2 alts to green orbs, which will continue the continuity of sending full hands of greens, and then we use another stack. And every time we use Elmesia, not only is she resetting us, but she's also giving us 15% attacks, 15% attack every time. Every time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we got points, we got alt gauge, we got more Elmesia, and if you do this for 7 turns, eventually it'll end up looking like this, where you're on turn 8, and you've got 175% attack, 35 stacks of Rimuru's skill, 350% synergy power, which also means 350% alt damage, and instead of doing 100 or 200,000 damage, you're going to do, what does Rimuru do here? He does 120 million damage. 120 million damage. Let's go back. Let's go back and watch that again. Oh, nope, too bad. Come here. Do it again. There we go. 120. That is what charge teams are meant to do. Now, previous charge teams don't do 120 million, but they still do a butt ton of damage. That is the essence of a charge team. And if this was a blue stacking team, Gazzle would change orbs to blues, and we would just buff blue orbs in some way, shape, or form, and we would send full hands of blues. And that will get us a lot of protection gauge and allow us to use multiple stacks of the protector. That is the essence of a charge/stacking team. Next up are speed teams, or burst teams. These generally rely on green orbs or orange orbs, because both greens and oranges give you a lot of points, a lot of alt gauge, not a lot of protection gauge, but you're meant to do a lot of damage with your nuke very quickly. Within 3 to 5 turns, normally the protector handles most of your orb changes. You can have a few orb changes on the team still, maybe for turn 1, but generally your protector is going to handle the bulk of that with their own skill. And then most of your buffs, instead of being super high cost like charge stacking teams, you're going to have low cost. So Raphael and Diablo, they have 90 point skills. This team right here that we're going to run, the antagonist meta, which came out last month, they have 40 to 50 point skills. Not, almost half, but they're still going to do a lot of damage. So here, turn 1, we need to orb change with the free-to-play Cleash that's in the back. So let's swap her in, and let's also swap Shinsha in. And this is generally what's going to happen. You're going to do this, and you're probably going to get your protection gauge next turn. So we're low on this, we're low on points. Let's go ahead and send this. We have a lot of alt gauge now. Like, we have a full alt gauge for Cleash off of just 4 orbs. We weren't doing that in the last video. So let's go ahead and send this. And now, on turn 2, we have a Mills. We have an alt. Let's send Cleash to the back. And now we have a hand that's all wonky. Well, a Mills can definitely handle that, because he changes orbs to oranges, and then adds rainbows, which we haven't really talked about. But there you go. That's your primary form of orb converting, and that's how you're going to get a lot of alt, because your protector handles that, which allows you to build up a lot of small-time skills to help you do more and more damage. So now that we have an alt, we can use our 40 to 50 point skills, and we can do a reasonable amount of damage. We're not going to do 120 million, especially not in this stage where we're type neutral. But we're not here to do 120 million. We're here to do about 10 million damage, which is enough to kill any stage almost. So using 50 point, 50 point, 30 point, another 50 point skill, we have enough to use 4 decently powerful buffs and still nuke reasonably well. I mean, it doesn't look very good here, but we're not in a prime position. But that's a speed team. Low cost buffs, converters from the Protector, and very quick. Very, very quick. The final primary style of team is a defense team, which obviously is meant to be defensive. You're not meant to take damage. You're traditionally not meant to do a lot of damage because they have higher defensive stats than attack stats, but you're meant to outlast. This is a long form fight, just like charge teams, but we're charging for a different reason most of the time. 8 to 10 turns, somewhere around there. Your Protector, instead of orb changing for you or stacking up some kind of big time buff, is generally helping you win with some defensive oriented mechanic. You have low cost HP and defense skills, like nothing's higher than 40 points or something, and you generally have a lot of orb changers because you're banking on using all of your defense skills and having your Protector active, who is helping you resist damage. So in this clip, we are using the Vengeance team, a green-focused defense team. Most of them are green, some of them are blue, very, very rarely are they orange, but we only have like 5 defense teams total in the game. But what makes it defensive? Raphael is giving you guaranteed guard. That's a 50% damage cut from any normal attack the enemy does. That's pretty huge. Okay, what else does he do? He also gives you element attribute resistance, which means if you're fighting someone who's water or earth or wind, you will take 50% less damage from them there. And also, he seals the enemy's ability to give themselves extra attack, crit, or pierce, which will save you from taking even more damage. So, if we send all these orbs here, we get some points, we get some protection gauge, but more importantly, we get points, because next turn is when the enemies really start to buff themselves up. And if we compare the damage we take here, so Grucius does 2,000, okay, 1,200, and Albus will do 39 and 24. But you see, now the enemies have attack and crit, and they have a lot of different buffs going on. So now if we use the defense skills from Raphael and Yom, we're giving ourselves guard. We're giving ourselves resistance. We're going to seal the enemy's ability to do attack and pierce ups and crits up. And we're going to give ourselves physical resistance. So now instead of taking 2,200 damage or 4,000 damage, we can send these green orbs, and then we can really laugh at the amount of damage that we're going to take in now. So 1, 2, 3. All right, send whatever. This is an example team. But I don't know what we're waiting for. There we go. All right, so 1, 2, 3. Okay, cool. But how much damage do we take from this ult? 1 damage. And then this follow-up attack from Sufia is 1 damage and 1 damage. So you can see we went from taking 2,200 damage to 1. That is a defense team right there. You're meant to take less and less damage and survive. This team is banking on the Vengeance gimmick to eventually kill the enemies. We won't really get into that here, but they have their own special unique way of taking out enemies, and other defensive teams have other different gimmicks to do that as well. But defense teams meant to help you survive. It might take you a long ass time to win, but you're gonna win, because if the enemies can't kill you, then you can probably kill them. All right, we've talked about the different types of orbs. We've given a few examples of what teams and how they operate. Now it's time to talk about actual team composition. What makes up a good, well-functioning team? Well, first off is a Protector, whether it be Almesia or the second 2.5 anniversary Velzord or the 2nd anniversary Lumi. There are a number of different Protectors in-game. If we go in-game and we click on Protectors, there's quite a few of them. They all do vastly different things from one another most of the time. They all have their weird perks, quirks, gimmicks. They lead different styles of teams. You just have to kind of figure out which ones. And then we have the 3 pillars of the rest of the team. The DPS, the character who's actually meant to do damage. Now, right now, with the 3rd anniversary, we have Raphael. How do we know that Raphael is a DPS character? Well, if we look at Raphael's kit, you can tell based on the alt effect. So we go to skill, attack. Unleashes a single target space magic attack for 540%. If we look at the new Diablo and look at his alt, 150%. And it's labeled support, So Raphael is meant to attack. His ult is very, very strong against a single enemy. There are also strong AoE ults that do a lot of damage to everybody, but Raphael is considered a DPS character. And then we move to dedicated support characters. Characters who could do a lot of damage, but are mostly there to help support the DPS and help them do a lot of damage. In this case, Diablo is giving everyone guaranteed synergy and 100% synergy power. That's a lot of support right there. Raphael is also giving Dark and Space allies 120% element attack. So Raphael is not only a DPS, but can also serve as a support. And I have Violet down here as an example because she technically fits all three categories, and we'll talk about that. So support, Diablo, giving massive damage buff to the DPS and everybody else. Raphael is the DPS while also being able to give support to other characters. They can mix and match. And then we have Orb Changers, which some teams desperately need them. Some teams, like the Emils and Shinsha team that I showed, that oranges, yeah, we can use them, but it's mostly relegated to the Protector to change orbs most of the time. But for other teams, you're going to need Orb Changers. So Gazel changes Divine General orbs to green. This free-to-play Veldora changes Exalted Champion orbs to green. And this Violet changes 2 oranges and 1 blue orb, or 1 green orb, to 3 blues, because she wants to run on a blue team. Violet can also be a DPS because she's got a really strong single target ult. Violet can also support other people because she's giving everyone a 100% magic buff. So Violet is one of the rare units that can fit all three categories. And she's not the only one. There are others who can support in multiple different ways. So we're not strictly relegated to one specific role unless your kit is very selfish, you're a DPS character, and you have no orb changing going on whatsoever. And then you are strictly a DPS, and that's where your usefulness becomes not as good as other units who can fit multiple different roles. This Violet came out a year ago, exactly a year ago, and she's still really good because she can fit into 3 different categories. That's what makes units good. Locking a character to one team, like maybe this Milim, who came out for the 2.5 anniversary Exalted Champions, she doesn't have any orb changing. She doesn't support anybody else. Her buffs are all very personal and selfish, and she's only meant to do damage. So I'm not going to bring her as a support character because she's not supporting anyone. I'm not going to bring her as an orb changer because she's not orb changing. So you have to mix and match and figure out who is doing your damage, who is supporting your damage dealer, and who is converting orbs to enable you to do that damage. That is what a good team composition is. You generally want 1 DPS character, a few supports, and at least 2 orb changers, unless you can get away with 1 somehow, which the 3rd anniversary team kind of can because of their gimmick. But those are the building blocks of any well-focused team. Okay, so now that we've talked about, different styles of teams and what orbs do what, now it's time to actually start team building, giving examples of what does work and things that you should really avoid trying to build. As a new player, just with a caveat, you're not going to have a lot of options because every unit is new. You don't have every single unit available to you, so use this as just a basic guide. But everyone should be looking for a few things. First off, your Protector, again, they're doing a lot. They lead teams, they lead different forces, so the new Elmesia, she leads Divine General, she gives extra damage to wind enemies, she gives a buff to magic allies, and she wants to be run on a green team. So in order to make her work, you're looking for a few things. You're looking for Divine General units, which the new Raphael and the new Diablo and the new Gazel certainly are. Okay, they're all magic, so they're getting the extra damage buff for magic allies. They're getting extra damage against wind. Raphael is the nuking character, so he's not only getting that 60% or 100%, also being naturally type advantage means that he's going to hit really hard. And then the orb color. Gazel is a green orb changer. This team wants to run on greens. So if we look back at the trifecta of good things, we have a DPS, we have a support, we have an orb changer. That leaves 2 slots to do kind of whatever you want. You can put another damage character in here as long as they make sense, like Visions of Coleus Violet, right here. Her orb change to blues does not help this team, but her big time magic buff certainly does help Raphael because Raphael is magic. You could put in Swimsuit Shizu. Her weakness strike buff will help Raphael. She has a single alt swap to blue, which isn't great, but you kind of can get around it if you use Gazel to then orb change. So that is an option. What you're not looking to bring is a unit that is overlapping with something else. So Raphael gives a space buff. So you don't need to bring like Space Milim or anything like that because she's got a 50% space buff. That if I'm going to bring her as a baseline support character, she's already eclipsed by what Raphael is doing. We don't need her. If you want to run her as a sub DPS character, you can, but as a dedicated support, not a good idea because her buff is weaker than Raphael, and we're going to use that one. Something you also want to avoid are buffs that don't apply. Let's see. Let's talk about Octagram Lumi. She's a mainstay on a lot of teams. She gets, when she's skill fused, 30% AoE attack and 80% permanent alt damage. Well, that alt damage has a cap at 80%. Raphael, with his skill, he can stack unlimited. So if you hit 80% just by using Raphael skills, it negates everything that Lumi is trying to stack as well. It's not going to be Raphael stacks plus this once you get past 80. It's just going to be Raphael stacks. And then the AoE buff only affects Diablo because he's AoE. It doesn't affect Raphael because Raphael's single target. So Lumi, not the best support character to bring. Fount of Wisdom Rimuru is buffing physical allies. We are all a magic team, so that doesn't make a lot of sense. You want to bring, now that we have, damage and support, orb changing, maybe bring another orb changer for green orbs, like Isis or Aaron, who can convert dedicated orbs. That way you can get your full hands of greens. You could bring an alt swapping character. There's not a lot of them right now, but you could bring the hero, or you could bring Idol Shuna, or you could bring Overlord Shizu if you're lucky enough to have her. This will help keep the continuity of not having 3 alts in the way of sending 6 green orbs. So this, you could make a team that looks like this, and it'd be pretty good. You want to avoid, again, buffs that overlap and don't make a lot of sense, or buffs that just don't affect your single target damage dealer. You want to avoid orb changers, dedicated orb changers who don't work for the green focused team. Like, these are things to keep in mind. It's okay if these other characters don't fully match up to what Almizia is doing as far as the force or the damage element, or if they're physical or magic. As long as they are still bringing benefit to the team, the primary units, then you're going to be okay. Now, let's look at a different team, not the Almizia team. Let's look at, say, a blue stacking team. So let's go with Visions of Coleus Lumi, the 2nd anniversary team. She came out with a very stacked meta of characters. So Jean, and then we had the free-to-play Cliche. Where is she? This team runs fairly well. Why does it run well, though? Well, you've got a stacking blue protector. She gives extra skill points on blue orbs. Okay, well, that means you want blue orb changers. So we have Violet, who changes blues. We have Blanc, who converts alt orbs to blue orbs. We have Cliche, who changes to blue orbs. And we have Rimuru, who changes to blue orbs. So we have a lot of orb changing, so we can get around almost any situation. Jean is the primary DPS character. She's got a personal buff. She's got a lot of support going on. Blanc has a support buff, and Violet has a support buff, and Cliche has a support buff. So we've covered pretty much the entire gamut of what you want. You have the protector, you have the DPS character, you have supports in multiple units, and you have a lot of orb changers. This is a well-built team. Cliche is not the best character, but she does work on this team. This makes sense. What would not make sense if you were to bring, say, Gazel. Changing to green orbs is not what this team wants. This team does not run on greens. He has no purpose here. And none of these characters are Divine General, which is what his orb change affects. So he's not a good pick. Bringing, let's see, Tempest Elite Benimaru or something. Where is he? He's also changing to blue orbs. That's good. But his physical buff does not affect anyone because this is, once again, a full magic team. So you want to avoid that. Another character you want to avoid is, let's say, Ainz. Well, not Ainz because he's collab. Let's do Vengeance Veldora. He's currently on the 3rd anniversary banner. Does he help this team out? I mean, kind of. Because Jean is on Warrior's Mind, Vengeance Veldora buffs Weakness Strike for Warrior's Mind. But we're already getting Weakness Strike from Blanc, as long as you understand what they do. So we're getting a lot more from Blanc than we are Veldora. And then his alt buff gauge, like his other skill, the Vengeance, is not useful on this team. And the stacking alt damage doesn't really matter that much when Jean is giving us 170%. So you can't you can bring him, but he's not the best option for you. And bringing another character like Isis or Aaron, who are green converts, not good. Now, if you don't have Jean, because she's a DPS character, okay, well, you still have maybe these characters. Violet can still work as a DPS. She's still a single target alt with a pretty big buff, and she's an orb changer, and she's got a support buff. So you could run this, and you could bring, these characters, and just have a bunch of orb changing, and just have the alt swap, the stacking, and this will help get you lots of blue orbs and lots of stacks. Like, this can work because Geld is changing oranges, Rimuru is changing greens and his own orbs. Geld is giving away orbs to your highest attacking character, which maybe is Violet, to ensure that she can get her EX alt. Like, this can work. These characters make sense because they're buffing blue teams, and Lumi is a blue stacking protector. How do we know that? Again, well, okay, we're in a fight right now, but let's click on her. Okay, she's not loaded, unfortunately. But if you read the kit, she gives Soul Divine Protection, extra 100% up to 500% skill points. Blue orbs. That's how you know that she's running a blue team. If we look at another prominent team, that is the New Year's Blessing team, Xion. So she wants physical allies, because she's buffing New Year's Blessing. She's buffing physical allies. She's giving extra damage against dark enemies, and she wants oranges because she herself is an orange orb changer. So bringing blue orbs and green orbs for this team, not really a good idea. Let's just reset this whole thing. So Xion, her team consists of where are you? Where are you? There you are. So Rimuru, Milim, Shinsha, and then the free-to-play Diablo. This makes sense. Why? Because Diablo converts 3 New Year's Blessing orbs to the highest attacking character, which hopefully is Rimuru. Shinsha and Milim have buffs that work well with Xion because she's giving guaranteed crit, guaranteed synergy. Okay, well, Shinsha gives crit damage, and Milim gives synergy power. And then Rimuru has his own rainbow skills and his personal attack buff, so he is the DPS character. This works. All these buffs synergize very well with what the nuking character wants to do and what the protector wants to do. Another character you could bring here now is a physical buff, like Rimuru. Yeah, his orb change doesn't make sense for this team, but a physical buff works on a physical team. Meanwhile, talking about Violet again, her orb change doesn't make sense anymore, and her buff doesn't make sense because these are all physical characters. A character that does help, Hinata. She has a Future Hand of Orange skill. This team runs on oranges. We have an element buff, which this team doesn't have, which we can give to everybody, including Rimuru. That's great. Tempest Elite Benimaru. Orb change doesn't make a lot of sense, but the physical buff, once again, works for Rimuru. So you want to make sure that your support buffs are really actually affecting your DPS character, and your orb changers also make sense. Alright, here's another example of a not good team. You have a protector, Veldora. He resets skill costs, he gives a magic buff, and he raises your skill cap. So he's another stacking protector. He wants to be run on a green team. So, why do these units not work very well with this team? Well, first off, Rain, she has a magic buff as well. They do not stack together, so her magic buff is weaker than Veldora's, so that buff doesn't make a lot of sense. Hinata, being a DPS character, yeah, she is. That's cool. This team wants to run on green orbs. She is a blue orb changer, so that's the first strike. The second strike is that Veldora is giving a magic buff. Hinata is physical, so that's the second strike. And the third strike is that she's just not good on this team. Straight up. So 2.5 strikes, I guess. She doesn't make a lot of sense. This free-to-play Hawker that came out during Ogre's Pride, he changes only Ogre's Pride orbs to blue. He is the only Ogre's Pride unit, and again, this is not a blue orb-focused team. He doesn't make a lot of sense. This Space Shinsha is Space character, so yeah, that could do. But if we're trying to make Hinata, quote-unquote, the DPS, Hinata has an alt buff already on her skill. Shinsha would make it a little bit better, but we already have an alt buff, so we don't really need to bring her either. And then Octagram Lumi, she can work on this fight because you can get more permanent stacking alt damage, but her AoE buff doesn't help our single target Hinata. So while this team has orb changing, has support buffs, and has a protector and a DPS, they don't actually work very well together because of their skills and what they do and do not buff, and what is being overlapped by some characters. This is not a good team build. Alright, another example. We have New Year's Xion. We've talked about her already. We have the new Raphael and Diablo. We've talked about them too. We have the free-to-play Cliche that came out earlier, well, last month in October. We have Light Hinata. Both of these units are orange orb changers. Xion runs an orange team, so okay, that makes sense. And then Rimuru has a 40% attack buff. Okay, so we have our protector, we have our DPS character again, we have 2 support units, and we have 2 orb changers. Is this a good team? It's an okay team. It can work, but it also does not work. Why is that? Because Xion wants to run a physical team. Our DPS is a magic unit, so Xion is not going to give Raphael the guaranteed crit, or guaranteed synergy, or the extra stats to magic, or to physical, because Raphael is magic. Okay, so those are a couple bad things right there. Having 2 orb changers, yeah, that's nice. That can help us get set in case we maybe can't use Xion for a turn and we still need 6 oranges. That's fine. I have no problems with that. The other problem is that this team is very limited on skill points, right? We cap at 150 and we get an extra 30 for the first 5 turns, or 4 turns. After turn 2, 3, 4, and 5, we get 30 points. So if we're going to be orb changing a lot, that cuts into our costs. And Diablo and Raphael, they both have 90-point skills. If you build up and save literally every point, like, yes, you can use both those skills, but it gets to be rather unwieldy, and we're not benefiting from the most skills out of Xion. So this is not a good team build. Like, if you want to swap these characters out for maybe physical units, then I could see that being a thing. So if you want to use Xion and you want to use who's a character here, like Rimuru. So Xion is now going to give guaranteed crit, guaranteed synergy to this Bride Xion because she's physical. We can give the physical attack buff from Rimuru to Xion, and we can give an attack buff from Rimuru to Xion while having 2 orb changers. This team would make a lot more sense because Xion's buffs are cheap. We have 1 big time buff that we can definitely work with, but trying to add a second, like, really expensive buff, not so much. And we have orb changers and we have DPS character. So that is how you would fix that first team into this team and make it run a little bit more efficiently. All right, now that we've gone over some examples of good and bad team building and what you should be looking for, time to talk about the other elephant in the room that I haven't touched on, and that is the support slots for your units. So I'm talking about these other 6 characters that exist down here. These are very important for a number of different reasons. First, let's talk about the protector support. So Ramiris right here, if we look at her kit, at her skill, her supporting Divine Protection, when she's in a support slot, she gives extra space attack and magic attack by 5%. This is the 3rd anniversary team. Our nuking character is Raphael, who is both space and magic. So that's why Ramiris is here. We're matching elements to our nuking character to give them the maximum amount of buffs possible. What wouldn't really make sense if we were to bring maybe Toa, because she's buffing fire and physical, and we are neither of those. So that's one indicator. But it's not the only indicator, because if we go back to Ramiris and look more deeply into what else she does, if she's duped out, she has a trait. which this is when you have 75% or more HP, you get extra attack. This is a stacking team. You're in the battle for a long time, and in some harder difficulty fights, you're probably going to be under this. So this isn't really going to be as impactful as a different trait where they're meant to be stacking. So what else is this? What else can work for this Raphael? Fount of Wisdom Diablo. What do? You give Fount of Wisdom Primal Demon. I'm pretty sure that Raphael is on Fount of Wisdom. Yeah, he is. So Fount of Wisdom right there. So let's go back to the Protector Diablo and look at what else he does. So he's giving 7% attack to Fount of Wisdom. Raphael's Fount of Wisdom. His trait, when one or more Vanguard have 70% or lower HP, gives you extra attack. So Diablo would actually make a lot of sense for a number of reasons. One, because he's giving Fount of Wisdom, our nuking character, 7% attack right here. And the opposite side of what that Ramos is doing, where we're in a long fight, we're probably going to take some damage, and you're probably going to have someone lower than 70%. Now you get extra attack in that aspect. And because we're in a long fight, because we can expect to be under this HP threshold, we want to make sure that we can give this attack buff to Raphael. So Diablo would actually make a lot of sense to lead Raphael. The element buff, I mean, he's not doing an element buff unlike the older 5-star protectors. So some of the older protectors, instead of giving buffs to certain forces, like Gabru's giving wind and magic, space and physical, space and magic, earth and magic, light and physical, light and magic. Like, you can tell just based on their icons what they're going to be buffing. It's only when we start to get to the forces that it becomes less clear, and you actually have to go click on them. But characters who wouldn't work very well, light, physical, Shizu, we're not piercing on this team, that's her trait. We're not light, we're not physical, wouldn't make a lot of sense. If you have Guy, like, he would buff the space attack. The physical would be kind of wasted, but he would at least buff space attack. And the really important thing is that you always have at least some kind of unit in the support slot. Because you can see that our Almesia, base level, 47, 2000, and 1900, when we add Diablo, those numbers jump up by quite a bit. And it's just extra raw stats, which translates into extra raw stats for your actual units. So no matter who it is, even if they don't actually match because you don't have any good options, always make sure to have a support slot character for your protector, because it is just helping you get a little bit stronger across the board. Alright, now moving on to the battle unit support slots. These can take on a number of different things you want to do. Let's skip ahead to the big three, which is Milim, and Gazel. This is how I always start with over half of my protection gauge. It's because these three units, with their full level 92 or above traits, give you starting protection gauge. So if you've ever wondered that, this is why. It's these three characters specifically, always in the support slots. You don't have to put them in the support slot, but they're going to give you the most protection gauge out of literally anyone on turn 1. And having protection gauge, as we've learned throughout this video, is very, very important. Alternatively, there are some other units that can do this. So we have Water Soe, Wind Lumi, Space Milim, and technically Octogram Romarus. They, instead of giving protection gauge on turn 1, they give extra skill points on turn 1. So 6 at level 92 with their full trait active, 6, 12, 18 extra points, and then if you have dupes in Octogram Romarus, she'll give 6 as well. But this is how you can start with more skill points, enabling you to use more skills on turn 1 to maybe help set things up a bit better, or maybe you don't need as much protection gauge because activating a bunch of skills is going to get you a protector anyways. So these are the SP4 characters. This is the big three. You'll pretty much see me use the big three like 95% of the time because having protection gauge is important. Now, what else needs to come into mind is the same element types. You can see that Gazel and Milim are both Earth. They have this little extra glowy border around them. If I were to change this to someone who's not Earth, that special border is gone. You gain extra stats in the support slot when you match elements, but it's not always best to try and match elements when you have better traits in mind. We know Milim has a good trait, so the fact that she matches up to Gazel is great. Dark Milim matches up to Diablo. That's great. The hero does not match up to Gazel. Does that matter? Not really, because Gazel's trait is more important than giving the hero extra raw stats, because she's not the focusing, nuking character of this team. She is a dedicated support. She's not meant to do damage, so we don't need her to have extra stats. Raphael needs extra stats, so we've got him hooked up to Space Blanc. That makes sense. But now, on top of being the same element, Blanc also has a good trait for this team, which is Protection Gauge every 3 turns. So like how Milim, and Gazel gives Protection Gauge on turn 1, this Blanc on every turn 3, turn 6, turn 9, and depending on how far you go, we just get an extra free 7 points of Protection Gauge. So she has a good trait, and she matches up elements to Raphael. So that is the winning combination right there. The same thing with this Shizu. She's a support character, but her actual trait is Protection Gauge on turn 2. 6 points every 2 turns. And then you combine that with this Milim, who has pretty much the same trait, where it's Protection Gauge on turn 2. That means that by combining these characters, not only does they have extra stats to make them tankier, we have a lot of Protection Gauge coming in on turn 2, and then we have Protection Gauge on turn 3, and we have Protection Gauge on turn 1 as well for these starting characters. So traits matter for your support slots. If all of your support units are level 80 or level 100, they have no traits, whatever, then, or lower by that means, just match up the element as best as you can. If you have no good support slot traits, then you can disregard that and you can just match up elements to make them as tanky and as strong as possible, which is what new players are really going to have to do, because they don't have dupes for characters that have good traits. They have a whole bunch of 3 stars and 4 stars that match up elements to your nuking characters or your mainline anniversary units. And if that's the case, just match the elements as best you can. All right, so here are some spreadsheets that one of my Discord moderators, helpers, Mai, makes every month, and she updates it whenever unit comes out. So these are the units that give Protection Gauge from their trait, skill points on their trait, and alt gauge on their trait. You're really only going to pay attention to the skill points and the Protection Gauge, mainly the Protection Gauge. So we have what turn you get it. So start of battle, the big 3. The first 3 turns, Trainee, Groom Rimuru, Autogram Lumi. So turns 1, 2, and 3 you get Protection Gauge, and then you get nothing out of their trait after that. Then you have every 2 turns, and then it's broken up by how many points you get, based on the level 84 trait, or the first dupe, and then the third dupe trait. So every 2 turns, every 3 turns. The same thing over on skill points, and the same thing on alt gauge. There are other traits that are super conditional and very niche, like this Diablo. He doesn't have a protection or skill point trait. He has, when you unleash 6 greens, he gives himself attack. These traits are very, very specific and gimmicky, and most of the time not overly useful for the rest of the team. He gives himself 5% attack. Diablo is not the nuking character on this team. He has a terrible multiplier for his ult. Like, he's at 150%. He's not meant to do damage. That is an example of a trait that you don't really need to worry about all that much. Like, if you have it, yeah, sure, fine, that's cool. But it's nothing to go out of your way to try and activate, because it doesn't help literally anybody else in this team. So there are other traits that give debuffs, that give other kinds of buffs, pierce power, crit power, and they can work in very, very specific circumstances. If you want to use Diablo as a support slot for some other dark character and you're sending green orbs and you can give them attack, like, yeah, but that requires a very specific setup to do. So mainly focus on characters that have protection gauge traits. And if you're ever like, Joker, I have all these shards, what should I dupe up from the old characters? You should refer to this chart right here and look at Water Xion, Fire Violet, Light Lumi, Groom Rimuru, like the big 3. Like, these are characters that you should maybe use your 5-star shards on in case you're needing extra protection gauge, or skill points for that matter. Alright, we've reached the end. Very, very long video, but hopefully you found something in here useful on your journey to become a better slime player. I understand it's a lot of information. I've got timestamps down here. There's a lot of intricacies that you probably didn't expect that this game would have. It's a lot to take in, and I don't expect everyone to learn it right stat now. But if this guide helped you out in any way, shape, or form, please let me know in the comments. If there are things that you think I can improve on, please also let me know in the comments, and I will try and improve the next guide when I do it probably next year for the 4th anniversary. But feedback is essential for making these videos better tailored to what you guys need. I'm a whale. I've been playing this game for 3 years straight. I know what's going on generally most of the time. Most of the time. Other players do not. And sometimes the big long-time players lose sight of that. And I recognize that. I oversight a lot of things in this game that new players are dealing with because I'm not a new player. So, and in any way I can make this guide better for you, let me know. But that's it for me, guys. Take it easy, and I will see you all later.